We're going to start this meeting now. It's a quick half hour here. Do this training. So Anita, will you just mark the role we have right now?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. And can I get approval of the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask that we move the, I think it's page 29 and 30, the last two pages, can I ask that we move those to committee reports?
Yes. So we'll move that over to the regular board meeting into committee report.
Thank you. And then I would second the motion to that amendment.
Is there any objections? Comments? Okay, so no objections. The agenda is approved as with the changes. And now I'll just turn this right over to Barbara Nault to do the fair market value training. Hey, Barbara.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Anita, I'm not sure how you wanted to proceed with the slide deck. Do you have that available to put on the screen for the folks that are in the room?
I do.
Great. All right, now is that going to be something I'll need to ask you to advance the slides on?
Yes. You want to share your screen?
That works for me.
Okay.
You want me? I'm sorry, say that again?
Do you want to share your screen?
I don't have it teed up. I just assumed that it would be available through the packet. So if you don't mind, that'll work.
Yep, I got it. It's good.
Great. Okay. Good afternoon again, everyone. I was asked to prepare a 20-minute training session regarding fair market value. Obviously, that's a very broad topic. So this presentation is focused on some specific items at the request of the Compliance Committee. I'm still going to be moving very quickly through the slides because there is quite a bit to cover, and I do want to try to leave a bit of time at the end for questions if possible. So if we take slide 2. All right, so here's kind of the big picture of what we're going to cover during this presentation. To put fair market value in context, we're going to first talk about 2 federal statutes where fair market value is a key component of financial and payment arrangements between hospitals and physicians who are in a position to refer. The first of these is the Physician Self-Referral Law, also known as the Stark Law or Stark. Stark includes a very specific definition of fair market value, and fair market value is a requirement of most of the Stark exceptions, which define permissible arrangements, and we're going to look at a few examples of those. We'll also touch on the potential consequences of being a party to an arrangement that implicates Stark, but does not exactly meet the requirements of an exception. The other federal statute where fair market value is important for compliance purposes is the anti-kickback statute. Fair market value appears in many of the commonly used safe harbors, which define arrangements that do not trigger a violation of the anti-kickback statute. So ensuring that payments or other financial arrangements are at fair market value is an important part of structuring compliant arrangements for purposes of Stark and the anti-kickback statute. With that context in mind, we'll then turn to how fair market value may be determined and some examples of what federal regulators have said about methods of determining fair market value. And I'm hoping to save some time at the end for questions. If we could go to slide 3, please. So what is Stark? Stark is a federal law that prohibits a physician from making a referral for certain defined designated health services that are payable by Medicare if those referrals are to an entity with which the physician or an immediate family member of the physician has a financial relationship. That is the statutory prohibition. Those referrals are prohibited unless the financial relationship is structured to meet exactly all of the requirements of an applicable exception. And exceptions appear in both the statute and the Stark regulations. I wanted to note that most of the terms in this Stark Law prohibition have very specific definitions. So referral, designated health services, entity, immediate family member, financial relationship, all of those terms have definitions within the act and the regulations. So to understand the scope of the Stark prohibition, it's important to consider all those definitions in light of the particular arrangement. We're going to look at a couple of the, examples of those definitions in a moment for some additional context. In addition to prohibiting physician referrals, Stark also prohibits an entity from billing for improperly referred designated health services. So as an example, a hospital would be prohibited for billing for services arising from a referral if that referral comes from a physician who's in a non-compliant financial relationship with the hospital. Stark is a strict liability statute. So that means a violation is a violation unless the arrangement meets exactly all of the requirements of an exception. If you could go to the next slide, please, Anita. Here's one of the definitions that I mentioned, designated health services. So that includes, among other things, lab services, radiology, and other imaging services, home health, inpatient and outpatient hospital services. These are services, obviously, that most hospitals offer. So when we talk about a DHS entity, generally that includes hospitals. A physician with a financial arrangement with a hospital would be prohibited from making referrals to the hospital for any of these services unless that physician-hospital financial arrangement meets exactly all the requirements of a Stark exception. Next slide, please. So what constitutes a financial or compensation arrangement? And here we have those terms defined. So a financial relationship includes a direct or indirect compensation arrangement with an entity that furnishes designated health services, like a hospital. A compensation arrangement means any arrangement involving remuneration, direct or indirect, between a physician or a member of the physician's immediate family and an entity. Examples might, just to put this in some greater context, so payment to an employee for services provided by that employee, payment for call coverage by physician to a physician at a hospital, lease of office space, medical directorship payments. Those would all be considered compensation arrangements. Next slide, please. So obviously, when we talk about Stark, it's a fairly onerous statute, but the government has recognized that some financial arrangements between designated DHS entities like hospitals and physicians can be beneficial to Medicare and other federally funded programs. So there are exceptions to the prohibition. The exceptions define certain permissible arrangements, and each exception has multiple requirements. The arrangement is compliant only if all the requirements are met. Many of the exceptions include a fair market value requirement. So a couple of those examples are listed on this slide. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just some of the more commonly used Stark exceptions. So rental of office space, whether the physician is a landlord or tenant, hospital is a landlord or tenant, rental of equipment, as I mentioned, bona fide employment arrangements, so hospitals employing physicians, personal services arrangements. So that would include where a physician or a group of physicians is providing services at the hospital, and would also include medical director arrangements. And then isolated transactions. So this would include, for example, the purchase or sale of a physician practice or assets of a physician practice. There are a number of other exceptions not listed here. And some arrangements may actually satisfy more than one exception. So we want to find at least one exception that the arrangement satisfies in order to be Stark compliant. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides just give you some context for how fair market value appears in these Stark exceptions. So the language of the exception for rental of office space is listed here, and the component, the one component, item number 4 of that exception, is that the rental charges over the term of the lease arrangement are set in advance and are consistent with fair market value. Next slide. Another example is the exception for bona fide employment relationships. So again, this is the language from the introductory portion of the exception, and then listed within all of the requirements for that exception, number 2 states that the amount of the remuneration under the employment is consistent with fair market value of the services. So again, I'm just pulling out examples so you can see there how these FMV requirements appear in the context of some of these more commonly used Stark exceptions. Next slide, please. And here's one also very common exception for personal services arrangement. And in this circumstance, the requirement is that the compensation to be paid over the term of each arrangement. So this can apply, like a particular physician or physician group might have a service line agreement, but also a medical director agreement. So in that context, the compensation to be paid over the term of each arrangement must be set in advance and not exceed fair market value. Next slide, please. So what is fair market value for purposes of Stark? There are 3 parts to the current definition. I've only listed 2 here that are more relevant to the exceptions we've been discussing. I've omitted the subpart for fair market value of rental of equipment. In the 2 here, though, that are listed include a general sort of catch-all, and then one that's very specific for office space, rental of office space. So fair market value means, in general, the value in an arm's length transaction consistent with the general market value of the subject transaction. And I've underlined the term general market value because this definition of fair market value uses this other defined term of general market value, which we'll also look at in a moment. Fair market value for purposes of rental of office space is value in an arm's length transaction of rental property for general commercial purposes, specifically not taking into account its intended use, without any adjustment to reflect the additional value the prospective lessee or lessor would attribute to the proximity or convenience to the lessor, where the lessor is a potential source of patient referrals to the lessee. And then also it must be consistent with general market value. So there are some very specific requirements for fair market value with respect to rental of office space, as an example. Next slide, please. So here we have the Stark definition of general market value, which is a component of the definition of fair market value. And this also has 3 sub-portions, if you will. I've omitted the definition that applies to general market value of assets, just for purposes of trying to save some space in the presentation. But general market value with respect to compensation, which is very common in the exceptions that we've discussed earlier, requires the compensation that is paid at the time the parties entered into the service arrangement as the result of bona fide bargaining between well-informed parties that are not otherwise in a position to generate business for each other. And there is also that requirement in the general market value definition for purposes of rental of equipment or rental of office space. Again, that these market values cannot take into account any sort of value ascribed to the fact that the parties may be in a position to refer business to one another. So valuators that do work in the healthcare industry understand that healthcare arrangements are unique, and their analysis must take into account the Stark definitions of fair market value and general market value, and that those definitions differ from what fair market value might mean in other industries. So very briefly on the next slide, I was asked to sort of discuss some of the consequences of a non-compliant arrangement. So violation of Stark can lead to a number of pretty significant consequences. As noted above, Medicare will not pay for these services. Also, if an arrangement, a non-compliant arrangement exists for a period of time, if there's a period of non-compliance, then the government will seek to recoup or recover amounts paid during that period when the arrangement was basically tainting the referrals. The government can also assess civil monetary penalties, including higher penalties if they deem an arrangement was an attempt to circumvent the prohibitions. Obviously, the government, they've been dealing with some pretty creative arrangements for a while, so they're very keen on not allowing those to go forward. On the next slide, another consequence of a Stark violation is exclusion. So exclusion from Medicare participation in the program. And these are the consequences of exclusion listed here. So no payments can be made. It's more broad than just paying for items. It includes payment for administrative and management services not related to patient care, as well as salary expenses and fringe benefits. If claims are submitted, there can be, as I mentioned, CMPs, civil monetary penalties, and potential for treble damages. And then if a party is excluded, obviously getting reinstated into the program is not automatic. So we'll move now to anti-kickback and do a quick review of that particular statute. So the anti-kickback statute is a criminal statute, not a civil statute like Stark. So in the event of a violation, consequences include the potential for actual jail time. So the federal anti-kickback statute makes it a criminal offense to knowingly and willfully offer, pay, solicit, or receive any remuneration to induce or in return for the referral of an individual to a person for the furnishing of or arranging for the furnishing of any item or service reimbursable under a federal health care program. It also covers purchasing, leasing, and ordering or arranging for or recommending those activities of any good, facility, service, or items reimbursable by federal health care program. So the anti-kickback statute has a broader reach, if you will, than Stark. It is not limited only to designated health services, as we discussed before. Go ahead, next slide. Remuneration in the context of anti-kickback includes the transfer of anything of value. It's not limited just to cash payments, for example, so it can be an in-kind form of a remuneration as well. It is an intent-based statute, so for the government to establish that there is a violation, they must meet that element of the criminal act. But the statute has been interpreted by multiple courts to cover any arrangement where one purpose of the remuneration is to induce referrals for items or services reimbursable by a federal healthcare program. So it's possible that there could be a legitimate purpose associated with a particular arrangement, but if even one purpose is an impermissible inducement or reward of referrals, then a violation may exist. Next slide, please. So as with Stark, the government recognizes that there are some legitimate payments between parties that participate in healthcare programs, and they have created safe harbors. So a safe harbor is a specific payment practice that is not going to be treated as a criminal offense under the Act and not serve as the basis for an exclusion from participation in these programs. Common safe harbors include space rental, equipment rental, personal services, and management contracts. They've recently added outcome-based payment arrangements. Those came out in the 2020 updates to both Stark and the anti-kickback statute, sale of practice, and employee arrangements. So the note that the anti-kickback statute safe harbors are similar, but they are not identical to the Stark exceptions. And these statutes are regulated by different agencies. The Center for Medicare Services, CMS, is the agency that manages Stark, basically is responsible for enforcement of Stark with the assistance of the Department of Justice. The anti-kickback statute is overseen by the HHS Office of Inspector General, the OIG. So when you're considering an arrangement, you have to look at both and look at both the Stark exceptions and the anti-kickback safe harbors. So anti-kickback fair market value, as you can see on the slide that Anita has up here, as one example, similar to the Stark exceptions, in many of the anti-kickback safe harbors, there is a reference to fair market value. Fair market value isn't defined in the statute, but the concepts have been described in numerous examples of OIG guidance. So over the many years that the OIG has issued guidance on these particular safe harbors, when they've referred to fair market value, they've talked about value for general commercial purposes. They've talked about arm's length transactions not adjusted to include any additional values that the parties attribute to referral of business between themselves. And then very recently, just earlier this year, the OIG issued a general compliance program guidance. I believe it's in the list of reference material that Nathan's going to be talking about after this presentation. But in that general compliance program guidance, the OIG discusses value of the remuneration, and they ask some very specific questions. Things like, is the remuneration fair market value in an arm's length transaction for a legitimate, reasonable, and necessary services that are actually rendered? Is the entity paying an inflated rate to a potential referral source? Is the entity receiving free or below market rate items or services from a provider, supplier, or other entity involved in the healthcare business? Is compensation tied to federal healthcare program reimbursement? Is the determination of fair market value based upon a reasonable methodology that is uniformly applied and properly documented? So we get some sense of what the OIG expects when it talks about, or when a party says to it, yes, this arrangement is at fair market value, and therefore we have satisfied a safe harbor. So let's take a quick look at a couple of the anti-kickback statute safe harbors. So on slide 17, the first example that was up was the safe harbor for go one more ahead, Anita, up to slide, there you go, space rental safe harbor. So in this circumstance, the safe harbor says that prohibited remuneration does not include payment by a lessee to a lessor for the use of premises as long as all of the following 6 standards are met. And one of those 6 is that the aggregate rental charge is set in advance and consistent with fair market value. So that's an example of how fair market value appears in the safe harbor for rental of office space. Next slide, please. Personal services safe harbor. Again, this is remuneration. The prohibited remuneration does not include payment by a principal to an agent as compensation for the services of an agent, as long as all of the following standards are met. And one of those is that the methodology for determining the compensation paid over the term of the agreement is set in advance and is consistent with fair market value. Next slide, please. This is an example of, this is the employee safe harbor for purposes of the anti-kickback statute. And I included it even though it doesn't mention fair market value, but it's important to keep in mind that an employed physician, for example, not only would not only want to try to satisfy the anti-kickback statute safe harbor, which doesn't require fair market value, but also the Stark exception, which does require fair market value. So again, it's important to keep in mind that some of the arrangements implicate both types, both of these statutes. Next slide, please. So this slide just lists the consequences of an anti-kickback statute violation, but I want to mention very specifically, so unlike Stark, which is a strict liability statute, if an arrangement does not meet exactly all the requirements of an anti-kickback statute safe harbor, that is not an automatic violation. That said, our goal when we're putting together an arrangement is to get as close as possible to meeting all of the requirements of a safe harbor. And only if all of those requirements are met is the safe harbor protection available for that particular arrangement. So let's move down to the slide 21 and talk a little bit about what the regulators have said when it comes to determining fair market value. So this is, I'll go through this quote in a little more in detail, but overall, generally the government doesn't say, here is how you must determine fair market value. They obviously want it to be a component of arrangements that they have deemed may be compliant between entities or parties that are participating in federal healthcare programs, but they don't and they will not tell the parties to those programs how to determine fair market value. So this is a quote that actually was issued back in 2001 from what is now CMS. Then at that time it was called the Healthcare Financing Administration, and it discusses fair market value and general market value. So at that time, CMS said to establish fair market value and general market value of a transaction that involves compensation paid, we, the government, intends to accept any method that is commercially reasonable and provides us with evidence that the compensation is comparable to what is ordinarily paid for an item or service in the location at issue by parties in arm's length transactions who are not in a position to refer to one another. The amount of documentation that will be sufficient to confirm fair market value and general market value will vary depending on the circumstances in any given case. The burden of establishing the fairness of an agreement rests with the parties involved in the agreement. Depending on the circumstances, parties may want to consider good faith written assurances as to fair market value from the party paying or receiving the compensation, although such written assurances are not determinative. So after the, what we see often in contracts as a result of that last portion of that language is written assurances. The parties will put into a contract a statement that says, we intend for the payments to, under this arrangement to be fair market value. We intend to meet that requirement. But the government's very clear that that is not determinative of whether or not fair market value, the arrangement actually satisfies fair market value. Next slide, please. So again, the government's not going to tell the parties to these arrangements how to figure what fair market value is, but they do make comments about some of the different methods. They talk about it at great length, frankly, in a lot of the commentary about how fair market value might be determined or could be determined. So one way that that does occur is some parties gather and compile their own data. This is fairly common. I've seen it in larger health systems. But other parties look to independent valuation experts. They pay for an opinion of value, and then they rely on that. And others use a combination of both. I think that's been the experience at Bartlett, that there are some instances where there's available information that is basically compiled within the organization, and other times where an independent valuation opinion is obtained for a particular arrangement. This language quoted here is appeared in recent commentary in the 2020 rules that came out, but it referred back to some of the statements that were originally made in 2001. We agree there is no requirement that parties use an independent valuation consultant, and they've been very consistent about that over the years. Basically no independent valuation is required when other appropriate valuation methods are available. However, while internally generated surveys can be appropriate as a method of establishing fair market value in some circumstances, due to their susceptibility to manipulation, absent independent verification, such surveys do not have strong evidentiary value and might be subject to greater scrutiny. Again, they're saying you don't have to do it, but if you don't do it, whatever you do come up with internally may be subject to greater scrutiny. Next slide, please. They also have strong opinions, but not necessarily very helpful opinions about salary surveys and data compilation. So when we talk about these are a very common source for referring or relying upon for establishing fair market value. So things like published data from Sullivan Cotter, VMG Health has some out there, MGMA has some. And in this particular circumstance, the government issued a number of comments on salary surveys and data compilations in conjunction with its updates in 2020. So these are direct quotes out of the CMS commentary. Consulting salary schedules or other hypothetical data is an appropriate starting point in the determination of fair market value. And in many cases, it may be all that's required. But it is not CMS policy that salary surveys necessarily provide an accurate determination of fair market value in all cases. Parties do not necessarily fail to establish fair market value or satisfy the fair market value requirement simply because the compensation exceeds a particular percentile in a salary schedule, nor are they required to pay what is shown in a schedule if the specific circumstances do not warrant that level of compensation. Next slide, please. They continue to say that they continue to believe that the fair market value of a transaction, and particularly compensation for physician services, may not always align with published valuation data compilations like salary surveys. It's possible that the amount of compensation set forth in a salary survey may not be identical to the worth of a particular physician's services. So CMS has gone to great pains not to tell parties how to determine fair market value, only that they have to do it and that they may be called upon to defend whatever fair market value they use in their particular arrangement. Next slide, please. This is something that actually came out very recently. So the Office of Inspector General published an advisory opinion talking about a particular I think it was a clinical lab arrangement. And they sort of spoke to this concept of fair market value. Fair market value, this is an example that fair market value compensation in an arrangement would not necessarily protect an otherwise non-compliant arrangement. And this quote, which appeared in the 2023 advisory opinion, actually was cited from a 2014 special alert issued by the OIG that talks about the fact that the anti-kickback statute is implicated when a clinical lab pays a physician for services. Whether an actual violation of the statute occurs depends on the intent of the parties. It goes on to talk about what constitutes a violation of the anti-kickback statute. But it says this is true regardless of whether the payment is at fair market value for services rendered. So the idea here is, for purposes of the anti-kickback statute, even if compensation is set at fair market value, there can still be a violation of the statute if the requisite intent to induce or reward referrals exists. So the next slide, which is the last slide, just has a couple of takeaways. Determining fair market value is only one aspect of structuring compliant arrangements with physicians and physician-owned entities who are in a position to refer to a hospital. Fair market value is an essential component of almost all the available Stark exceptions and the anti-kickback safe harbors. The regulatory agencies that have jurisdiction over those statutes, CMS and OIG, will not dictate how fair market value must be determined. The parties to the arrangement have the burden of demonstrating that compensation or remuneration is consistent with fair market value. And that is the end of the presentation. I do not know how much time I took. I apologize if I went over, but if there is time for questions, I'm happy to attempt to answer those.
Ask that if we have any questions that we go ahead and email them to our compliance chair, Hal, here, and we'll make sure that they get answered. Unless there's someone who has a real dying question right now, I want to make sure that we're running a little bit long.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. And with that, is there any comments or anything the board wants to make before I adjourn this, because we've moved B into the other part? That's great. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, Barbara. we're adjourned for this part of the meeting. So we are running a little bit behind. I was gonna take a break, but I think we're just gonna go right ahead. We'll take a break in the half hour, 45 minutes or so. But we're gonna call the regular board meeting to order. And Dr. Astor, can you lead us in the land of
Chiefs to the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian people. We respectfully acknowledge them as the original inhabitants of Southeast Alaska. Bartlett Regional Hospital is located on the homelands of the Akwaan. We are grateful to provide services in your ancestral homeland and to be part of this community.
Thank you, Dr. Astor. Anita, do you want to do a roll call? Yeah.
Everybody's here.
Everyone's here. Roll call.
Roll call.
Roll call. We get a motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Val.
Awesome.
Second. Any comments? Great, seeing no objections, the agenda is approved as written. Is there anybody here from the public today that'd like to make any comments? Not seeing anybody from the public. We're gonna go and turn this over to Dr. Rosenfeld for the physician of excellence.
All right, you guys are almost rid of me. Only one more meeting after this. So, I'm speaking to you about the Bartlett Physician of Excellence Award. We have many fantastic and dedicated physicians working at Bartlett Hospital. Hope is to recognize at least one a month while in chief for their outstanding service, acumen, leadership, and commitment to providing the best quality of care to residents of Juneau. This month, I'm pleased to recognize Dr. Noble Anderson for the Bartlett Physician of Excellence Award. Dr. Anderson's outstanding contributions to our healthcare community have made him an exemplary candidate for his esteemed recognition. He's online, so everyone can. He has been a pillar of strength and knowledge within our healthcare community since he set foot in Juneau over 17 years ago. His commitment to providing exceptional care to patients has been unwavering, and his contributions to not only our healthcare environment, but to our hospital itself are noteworthy of recognition. One of Dr. Anderson's noteworthy roles in serving is serving as chairman of the Health Information Management Utilization Review Committee. In this capacity, he has demonstrated exceptional leadership and keen understanding of the importance of efficient and effective information management in healthcare. Time and time again, he has demonstrated adaptability to an ever-changing healthcare documentation setting while continually educating our providers to optimize patient information management. His insights and oversight have undoubtedly contributed to the improvement of patient care and resource utilization within our medical facilities. In addition to his responsibilities in Juneau, Dr. Anderson has taken on a pivotal and volunteer roles in the broader Alaska community. His service as the EMS director for both Haines and Hoonah showcases his commitment to extending quality healthcare beyond the confines of this hospital. His leadership in these positions has been instrumental in ensuring that emergency medical services in these regions are not only available, but also aligned with the highest standards of patient care given their rural locations. Dr. Anderson's commitment to advancing emergency medical services is further exemplified by his role as a member of the Southeast Regional Medical Services, CERMS. Through this capacity, he has been actively involved in shaping policy and initiatives that enhance the emergency medical services and education throughout the region. His advocacy for improved emergency care has undoubtedly impacted the lives of many residents in Alaska, and is with extreme conflict of interest. As a current hospitalist, colleagues and hospital staff alike hold Dr. Anderson in the highest regard. His affable demeanor, collaborative spirit, and willingness to go above and beyond for both patients and his peers have fostered a positive and supportive work environment. His ability to foster strong collegial relationships has undoubtedly contributed to the overall success and cohesion of our healthcare community. In conclusion, Dr. Noble Anderson's exceptional service, leadership, and dedication to advancing healthcare in Alaska make him an outstanding selection for this award. With his already shining multiple years of service, I hope to look forward to more amazing years of service to Juneau. His collegial spirit will continue to promote productive and compassionate synergy for all providers in our community. It is with great pleasure that I present Dr. Noble Anderson for the Bartlett Physician of Excellence Award.
What are we going to do without that signature? Noble, thank you for everything.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. It's truly an honor. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all you do for the community. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. All right, we'll move on here to the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I think you missed something under number 3.
Well, oh, you're right, sure did, sorry. Oh, it's going so fast. So I want to introduce everybody to everybody who already knows. I'm sorry, Joe, we've introduced you like 2 or 3 meetings so far. And I missed that, but Joe Warner has come back and he started a few weeks ago. And he's come back to his role as CFO here at Bartlett. We're all very happy to have you back here. It's great. He's going to be able to jump in with 2 feet, 2 arms, 2 legs, and your whole body right into the pool to get us going. So please welcome Joe Warner back, and we're going to hear from you later on in the meeting. And I know we're all really glad to have you back. Joe. Hey, Joe. You got any more words for us, Joe? Any words for us?
A little bit.
Just one. Thank you, guys. The consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda. A second.
Right. Any objections? Questions? All right. Consent agenda is approved as written. Old business, Kim. Hospital capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Currently, we have no COVID patients in-house and no employees out with COVID. Wildfire Court has 54 med-surg. Their average daily assistance is about 15 a day, so 457 for October. We have 10 patients awaiting long-term care placement. Most of those need specialty care that we can't provide here locally, so either psychiatric services or intensive wound care. So that's adding a little complexity to link the stay for these folks. CCU had 49 for the month of October, and MHU had 136. Currently, they have 5. They're averaging about 4.5 to 5. We're still trying to get that number up. OB 105. ED had a 900, saw 931 patients for the month of October for average daily census of 31. RC currently has 13 patients. Supply chain, no issues to report, and Seattle or Anchorage is starting to see a decrease in the RSV admissions, but an increase in higher acuity with other folks. So beds are tight in Anchorage. And that's all I have to report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kim. Any questions for Kim?
How about beds in Seattle?
I did not know the bed situation in Seattle. Currently, pardon me through the chair. Currently, the call that we're on for the state call just involves the hospitals within the state that they just kind of started up, which they restarted from COVID when RSV was hitting. So I don't know the status yet.
Questions? Okay, thank you. So we're going to go on again with you to new business.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So it is time for the emergency department to get their redesignation of their trauma level 4. And so with that, we to approve that we go through with that with the survey. The survey is scheduled to come in like December 18th timeframe. So we just need that sign from y'all or the approval from y'all to be able to move forward to put that in our packet.
And I just want to clarify this. This is pretty much just kind of a housekeeping thing that we have to do. So we've seen this before. Is there any questions about this? So it is an action item. Kyle, you want to make the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move the Board of Directors of Bartlett Regional Hospital approve the hospital board resolution to sustain the levels 4 trauma hospital designation.
Second. Any comments, questions? Seeing none. No objections? Yes, thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Med staff report, Dr. Rosenfeld.
Med staff report, just to be on everybody's radar, the emergency department is hopefully going to be starting the new EMR on December 1st. There's been a lot of work into that. A lot of people have participated. It's going to go as smooth as hopeful. So we're all looking forward to that. And second thing is our end of the year med staff meeting. We'll be sending the board members and administration an invite just for a meet the doctors and get to know the board. And we'll figure out how that works. That'll be coming to you shortly. In terms of action items, I believe there are 4 action items. The first 3 action items, which is the disaster credentialing policy, the access to services policy, and medical staff shadow policy. Those were more of a language cleanup. Nothing substantial has changed within those policies. The fourth item is and we recommend that they be passed by the board from the med staff. Surgical first assist privileges, that comes directly from the medical executive committee to the board. This is a new privileges for the hospital, and what it involves is, just to give you some background, surgeons can't do everything with just 2 hands, and so it allows to provide for privileges to certain individuals with appropriate qualifications to assist in those surgeries. For example, a retired orthopedist who still has credentialing may assist with privileges to a current orthopedist type picture. Any questions like that? We also recommend that be approved as well.
All right, anybody have any questions about these, Dr. Raskin?
I do. So, this is addressed to both of my colleagues, if I could. Lindy, do you remember if we had so the policy now is just surgeons, right? And so, but we've also had non-surgeons, we've had PAs as first assist. Does this now preclude PAs from being first assist?
Right now, this is just covering the surgeons. What we're doing is we're going to expand as we go forward, because with the new credentialing stream, et cetera, we're adding these privileges to that. So that's coming down the road. We're in conversation with our bylaws right now about that. So,
okay, if I may then, to continue then, because JBJC, I can only see them, if they hire a PA, then they might want them and so I wasn't part of that conversation in the med staff if there was any consternation, so I don't have any data, but I just wanted to bring that up. So
yeah, we're aware of that. We're kind of adapting as we go. We just wanted to get this because this is currently being wishing to be practiced right now. We want to expand this.
and then we can add later if needed.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I know in the past, maybe the distant past, non-surgeons, people with pediatric or internal medicine specialists have assisted the surgery. Is that somehow affected by this policy?
So in the past that has happened, and again, it's kind of the same point of Dr. Astor. The goal is that right now we don't have any set privileges to allow for surgical assists. And so now we're starting that by starting with the physicians and then working our way down in terms of for obstetric assists, et cetera. But
So then-
still has to go through credentialing.
So then if I'm following you, it would say a psychiatrist would not then be allowed to.
Without that, they have to have proper training for that
Yeah.
position.
Thank you.
This may have nothing to do with what's going on here, but does any of this affect how billing happens? What I'm specifically asking is about balance billing for patients where they have their surgeon is in network, but they find out that the assistant is not.
I don't know the answer to that. My understanding is that I don't, and take this with a grain of salt because it's maybe false, but my understanding is that I think the billing only stays under the
Pro fee is under the plan.
right. So I don't think there's any additional fee for the assist. That makes sense. That's my understanding, but.
I don't,
I know that wasn't the case a number of years ago.
If I may, I don't typically use first assistance, so I don't have firsthand knowledge, but it's my understanding that especially because of the No Surprise Billing Act,
Right.
that if you are in a facility that has agreements, and almost everyone does, and almost all the surgeons do, I do with, the majors, that the point becomes moot. And so my suspicion is that would be very unusual to have a balance bill of any substance.
Thank you.
Dr. Jones?
No, I think,
All right, Debbie, Castlering's online here and she wants to say something. Clear this up a little bit. Debbie?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak. So there is DOP core privileges for non-physician types that you all approved in July. The DOP that's before you is for surgeons who only want to do surgical assist. So in the past, when Dr. Reiswick was a surgical assist, he would fill out the old orthopedic surgery core and he would write it in. Well, the new DOPs, we don't have the ability to write in. And we have Dr. Ted Schwarting, who is coming out of retirement, who wants to be a surgical assist for the new orthopedic surgeon. So these DOPs that are before you were created for that.
Thank you, Debbie. Everybody's giving
You're
you a thumbs up, so appreciate it. All right, any other questions? Okay, that's what's here. So we need to, this is an action item, right? Okay. Shelley, would you like to make the motion?
I move the Board of Directors of Bartlett Regional Hospital approve the core privileges for surgical first assist and the revised policies for emergency disaster privileges, access to services, and medical staff shadow as presented.
Second that.
Dr. Oster, second. Dr. Jones, second it. Seeing no discussion, no objections, this is approved. Thank you, Dr. Rosenfeld. Anything else for us? That's it? All right. Okay. Committee minutes and reports. We'll start with our planning committee. Good.
The planning committee minutes accurately, I say this every time, accurately reflect the discussion. A couple of things that I want to draw your attention to is something that the finance committee is bringing forward. We punted it off to the finance committee, the request to get on the CBJ's legislative preference agenda. So further discussion will be when finance committee comes up. Otherwise, things are going along with all of our projects. There's not much to talk about right now. Other than we have a lot of projects in the works and they're going along pretty smoothly. I would ask, are we final with the Aurora building?
Almost.
Okay. I know we were close and we were hoping that it would be around board meeting time. That was the only thing I think that in my mind was in question.
There's a few cosmetic things that need to be fixed.
I have to be happy to answer.
Anybody have any questions for Deb?
I have a question for Kim. Do we have a time frame on the projects that still need to be completed?
It should be done shortly. Our tentative date to provide services is December 18th. So we did do, pardon me through the chair, we did do a little drill that the crisis team put together, which went really well and had some volunteers coming in and high school students come in to kind of look to see where they could hide stuff, where, things that maybe our eyes missed. And it was really great. So some of those things were pointed out. So they're the construction and those, and I'd imagine it'd be done better.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Any more questions? Thank you so much, Deb. We'll move on to Dr. Jarvis with quality.
The minutes are there, but Kim, is there something we had to do do we need an action item today?
We do, and I think they're built into this presentation.
Okay, so can you please help me?
Yes, I can.
Kim, do you want to come?
So, yes. Go down just a little bit. So these items went through the quality committee. Since we're separate licensed entities, there are certain things that I need to have approved by the board. One is the hospice quality assessment and performance improvement scorecard, which was presented to the quality committee of the board and approved. Another would be the home health QAPI scorecard, which was also, and these are just basically the items that we're tracking, that we're measuring our outcomes on to make sure that we're continually improving the services that we provide. All of those were basically, all of our metrics are basically based on what CMS mandates that we provide information to them, and we're compared to other home health or other hospices, and payment can be determined by our outcomes. And we don't have enough data yet to even see what our outcomes are. That will be kind of in the future, but we are looking at real-time data to the best that we can at this point. So go ahead and scroll that up, Anita. The next is engagement. So the Wildflower Court, which is separate from the home health and the hospice, we need our quality plan approved and our scorecard approved, and they as well were approved at the quality committee with some changes to the plan, because there were some acronyms built into it, and I was asked to clarify those acronyms and a couple of typo errors, and those will be corrected on the plan. I have not been able to get in that system and make those corrections. I did to the scorecards. So the scorecards, I don't know if they were put into the packet that I submitted, but the scorecards were submitted and they're correct. But I need a motion on each of those to be approved.
So can we do one motion?
Yeah, well, so if it's okay, why don't we do this? Because it looks like 4 motions were made in the quality meeting. So I'm just going to read all 4 motions. Okay. And then we can just do it like that. That's okay. So Mr. Geiger made a motion, and it was seconded by Lisa to approve the Wildflower Court QAPI scorecard. And the motion was approved. So we have a motion on the table. It's been first and seconded. So is there any objections? Any questions? Seeing no objections, the first motion is passed. Mr. Geiger then made another motion to approve the Wildflower Court QAPI metrics. Ms. Peterson seconded. The motion was approved and passed. So again, that came out of committee. The same thing. Is there any questions? Seeing no objections, that's passed. Then Mr. Geiger made a motion to approve the home health care QAPI scorecard and metrics subject to the corrections that Ms. Stout talked about. And Ms. Peterson seconded this, and the motion was approved. Is there any objections or comments on this? Nope, seeing no objections to that. And last, Mr. Geiger made a motion to approve the home health, approve the hospice QAPI scorecard and metrics subject to the editorial corrections that Ms. Stout talked about. Ms. Peterson second, the motion was approved and passed. So is there any objections, questions, or comments on that? Seeing none, those have passed. Dr. Jones.
Perfect. That's great. You got it done. That's all we have there. I just want to make sure.
Okay. No more from quality? Okay. So we will move on to Lisa, the governance.
Okay, thank you. So we had a governance committee meeting and discussed several different things. We had the CEO evaluation on the table previously for David, and so we passed a motion to hold off on that, and which we did do. Ms. Stout talked to us about the Wildflower Court transition, which is just basically going over what she just talked about. And then we got to the meat of the matter, which was looking at the executive committee makeup and the open meetings rule of law. And we asked the CBJ law to discuss that. And I'm hoping that she's still here.
Correct.
Right there. Sorry, it's been a long day. It started at 5. So, anyway, sorry. And so I'm hoping that she can clarify it, because I'm sure she can speak better on it than I can.
Sure. So through the chair, so what we did basically is we looked at the makeup of the executive committee, and we looked at the Open Meetings Act, and what was happening is anytime the executive committee was meeting, there was a potential Open Meetings Act violation. And we looked at the intent of what you all and previous boards had wanted, which was to be able to have 3 members of your board be able to meet sometimes. So the decision was made at the governance committee to narrow the role of the executive committee to handle interactions with med staff, and also to handle emergency situations. And so I turned in, I think we have it, but language that does that. It narrows the official role of the executive committee to those 2 items.
Tell me the 2 items are.
So to meet with med staff per 154.7,
Okay.
and then to address crisis situations. So that's what the executive committee would be if you agreed to this. In regards to your board in general, under the Open Meetings Act, 3 members of your board can meet without violating the Open Meetings Act. But that's separate. Does that make sense?
So now,
3 members of the, so I'm gonna just.
Yeah, so I'll take a step back. Okay, so what was happening is you had an executive team, and that was Mr. Solomon Gross, Ms. Johnson, and Mr. Mertz. When they were meeting, it turned out they were actually already defined as an executive committee. Staff is also an ex officio member, and so law didn't realize what was happening until we kind of started having conversations about some meetings when Mr. Keith left. And so we said, wait, you guys can't meet because then you're triggering the Open Meetings Act because of the executive committee. And so we need to do something about that. If you guys, you either need to define what the executive committee does, you need to stop meeting. You need to change the makeup. You need to do something. And so the governance committee met and they talked about what they need an executive committee for, which is that interface with the med staff and a crisis situation where maybe they have to do something very, very quickly. COVID was probably a good example. Again, they're not doing anything without the final board approval. They don't, that's still in there. Does that help? Does that make sense?
So then are they still, is the executive committee still then with 3 members, is it still not, that it's not going to be subject to the rules of the Open Meetings Act?
They are subject to the rules of the Open Meetings Act. If that executive committee meets
Concerning those subjects.
they are subject to the Open Meetings Act.
Okay.
I think the med staff actually has an exception.
Exactly.
Yeah, that one has an exception. So it's really potential crisis situation. They would have to give 24 hours notice and have a meeting.
Okay.
All right, any other questions?
Thank you for explaining it.
What's that? So again, too, this came out of the governance committee. So it was passed through the governance committee. It was first, seconded. So it's us to approve it. So if I don't see any objections.
No, I'm
sorry.
not objecting, but
Do you have a
I
question?
did have a question I would just like to clarify through the chair. Okay, so if, I think you said the committee as re-designated in terms of its authority or its responsibilities was able to take emergency action, something that if it isn't possible or able to convene a full board, it would take action in an emergency. But then it was said by one of you, but then that would have to go to the full board to be a legitimate action. Actually, my understanding is in that situation that action could take place. However, it could be rescinded by the board at the next meeting, but they could move forward with a decision to do X, Y, or whatever.
That is correct. So through the chair, that is correct.
Okay.
And so, you know, when it's an emergency situation, they'll have to act carefully. But that is exactly how it would potentially work.
And the next board meeting, well, no, we don't want you doing that, or we.
That's right.
Or it would be discussed.
It would be discussed, it would be approved, it would be rescinded. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Any other questions? All right, that motion passes. Lisa, do you have anything else for governance?
Let's see. And then we just confirmed the compliance training program recommendations. We had a little discussion about, if we were going to have consistent 5 o'clock training or not. But currently the board is supposed to complete some annual compliance training and have this done by the December board meeting. But I don't know if it's ready to go yet. And that's it.
Anybody have any questions? Great, thank you. And then we'll go to Max with finance.
Thanks, Kenny. The minutes are here. I think they're fairly clear. We did discuss, the JBJC ED project. It was Joe's first meeting, so we kind of gave a little bit of a pass for one meeting about the depth of the financial report. There's an action item at the end of the minutes to move along what Deb was talking about earlier, which is the FY25 legislative capital priorities recommendation to the CBJ Assembly. It's down. It's on 64. Yeah, 64. There you go. So I would look for somebody to make a motion in a second relative to moving that along.
It did come out of committee, right? So it was passed along. So
Yeah.
so it has been made motion. So if there's any questions or comments on this? Nope, no questions or comments. Then it passes. No objections. I do want to say something about in your minutes here, and I'm not sure if Nate's going to talk about this in a little bit about the legislative priority list. Are you going to talk about this now, or are you going to talk about this later? Legislative priority list that we're going to write out.
For the chair, for some clarification, I did find out yesterday specifically that the means by which the board would communicate its desires for requesting this project be included in the legislative priorities of CBJ could come through a memo from the board president. So administration will draft up a memorandum for your signature, and then that will be passed on, specifically recommending this request for $2 million for the ED renovation and expansion project.
And we'd also spent some time talking with Mr. Bryson too about this request to this ask to how we changed it from the $4 million for the Aurora Behavior Health Center to the $2 million for the ED project. So I think we're right in line on that. So anybody have any questions about that? That was Max. That was the fastest finance meeting we've ever had.
Yep.
That was pretty good. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about compliance. We moved the compliance training attestation over to this section right here. So this is like letter D of the committee report. So I'll turn this over to Hal.
Yes, I talked about this last time, so I hope this isn't a surprise to anyone. The compliance committee has recommended that there's a course of self-study. And can you put that up, because I got my tablet. So the compliance committee previously has recommended to the board that we do self-study instead of just sitting here listening to a bunch of PowerPoint slides. And so this is going to be everybody's responsibility to go through this by yourself and come to the next board meeting prepared to ask any questions if you have any. I do want to point out under Stark Law, which one is the one under Stark Law? It's near the top. It's the third one down, Starkville. That's a 45-minute video or something. Notice that you're only required to look at minutes starting at 7:40, going to 13:30. So I think in all, this is something less than an hour worth of videos. So again, to be redundant and complete, we're asking every board member to go through these, each one of these, and bring this form with you to the next board meeting. Don't sign it until the next board meeting because you're going to attest that you were given an opportunity for interactive questions. And of course, we won't have had that opportunity until the next board meeting. So I hope that's clear.
So where's this located? Is this in my packet?
It's in your packet, yes. I hope that's clear.
This is in last month's board packet because I actually got a chance to go over a couple of them today. And it's also in the compliance packet for today, not the board packet, correct? Is that correct?
Yes.
I can email it to you as
Okay.
well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody have any questions?
Through the chair, if I might. Those other versions were edited a little bit, so this final version is the one that we should be looking at.
And then if I could, Mr. Chair, the final version is the one that's in the compliance packet for today with Barbara Knoll's slides. Is that
correct?
And also Anita said she'll make sure that everybody gets it. So this is an action item that was not in a committee, so would you like to make a motion, Cal?
Let's see, I'm looking here for the motion.
It's right up there.
No, it's just telling me what.
It's the action that we need to take.
Oh, so are you asking me to move that we adopt the?
Yes, it would be moved to the adopt.
Yes, okay, so I move that we adopt the recommendation for board compliance training on the sheet of paper that we looked at here a few minutes ago. I move that we adopt that for compliance training for this year.
Dr. Astor seconds it. Any comments, any objections? All right, seeing no objections, that has passed. All right, so we're gonna take a break right now, probably about a 10-minute break. Some leadership stuff, so we'll come back about 45
$25 fine.
That's what it
Factory short, because of
23 hours.
because we didn't want to get stuck down there with flag on Monday.
So anyways, that's what I really want to spend.
Chris.
The Godzilla movie any good?
Oh, I don't think so.
Oh, really?
We went to Troll.
All right, guys, we'll start up here. Thank you very much for coming back. And we're going to start with the senior leadership report, and we'll turn this over to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Everything that I wanted to focus on today, you can read in your packet, but I wanted to focus on just a few things. I promised myself when I come here that I'd really try and spend the time to understand the organization, the climate in which it was working, the competitive situation, the medical community, and our management and the issues. And so I thought the first thing I needed to do is project a sense of stability, that we're here for the long term. We're not trying to change anything rapidly. We're going to take our time and provide an environment so that people can maintain a sense of direction, as well as maintain a sense of they don't have to change what they're planning to do just because I wanted them to do it. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I've been trying to project to our leadership team is that we're in service. We're in service just like physicians are in service to their patients. They go, and other clinicians are in service to their patients. So we're in service to the clinicians that provide that care. What we have to do is make sure that we're providing a climate in which they can work in effectively, as well as move any blockades away from them in terms of things that operations can do much better so that they can operate more effectively. With Joe coming on board, we're going to start to work on sustainability. I've been chomping at the bit to do that. But what we really need to do is define what that means. And so I took a stab at this, but there's a lot more to it. How do we actually have a set of operations that is not only sustainable in the current period, but also sustainable over a long period of time? What do we need to do there? And so that's something that I'm very keen on, because the resources that we can provide to our clinicians in terms of facilities, in terms of equipment, in terms of staff, all those things are somewhat dependent upon our ability to maintain sustainable operations. And so their ability to maintain high quality of care is somewhat dependent upon our ability to provide those resources. So I'm very keen on that. And then finally, and I'm starting to get a clear idea of some of the strategies that might be useful to pursue, but we wanted to also figure out what sort of strategies are effective. Not every single strategy that you read or see about in healthcare is effective in every community. And it's somewhat dependent upon the board, the medical staff, how the medical staff is actually organized, of what strategies can do. But fundamental strategies of good blocking and tackling, good quality of care, all those things we can work on effectively over the next couple of months. But I do mention there that we do have some foundational strategies that are necessary but not sufficient to meet the broader market challenge. I think that's very important. There are some things that we can do that can make ourselves better, but there's still a major market challenge out there that we need to address. We'll start working on gathering that information. But I wanted to basically project warmth. We're here to serve. We're going to make sure that we have sustainable operations. We're going to do the hard work and strategy. I'm very pleased with what the Strategic Planning Committee had done with the approval of our strategic goals, because that provides me with a framework. We also have to figure out our timing. There's so much that's coming at us. Can we get something done? So I've put forth the concept, let's do 2 things well, not 10 things poorly. And then the way that I look at it is if someone wants something, then the question is, what do I have to drop to get that done? Is one more important than the other? So as we start developing our leadership team, I'm very happy with working with the people that I have here along. We'll get our rhythm starting to fix things. One of the areas that I've been really interested in focusing on is physician engagement. I read that report, I got that. I've talked to Nick about it, he gave me some summaries. So there's an area that we can really focus on in terms of meeting some of the needs by improving communication, improving some areas where they need attention. I won't go into the physician contracts. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. I did have a conversation with the head of Alaska Hospital Association, and did participate in one meeting with my peers. The thing that's important to note is that the state legislature is going to be coming into a meeting here fairly soon, and the AHA is planning out what it wants to focus the legislature on in terms of things that are coming, things that they like, or things that they can't support. So that's a very important part. One of the most important parts of that is December 15th, the governor's budget comes out. That's important to us because Medicaid, either rate increases or cuts will be coming. So that will give us some idea of what reimbursement will be. And I will keep the board appraised of some of the activities of the legislature agenda that will be coming up. I'll stop here and see if there's any questions in the report or anything you would like me to address. I don't want to use up the board's time on things that they've already read.
Thank you, Ian. Dr. Esser.
Doctor.
I don't know if this is the proper forum or if we need to be in executive session. I don't think so, but there's pending action by physicians suing the state to enforce the 80-20 rule. Does that mean anything? Could that speaking as from a position of the hospital, could that adversely affect the hospital?
You know, I don't know the answer to your question. I've gotten some emails on that, and I know it's on the legislative agenda. I don't understand the issue well enough to understand its impact on the hospital. So I'm going to have to get back to you on that one agenda item. But I know that AHHA is aware of that issue. I don't know their position on that. And one of the questions that I needed to understand sooner or later is what is our position? Because it may be somewhat in conflict with maybe the association's position. So I'll give you an example. There's some that would like to see the certificate of need go away. If I have $10 billion in the balance sheet, I would be supportive of that because I can deploy assets relatively quickly relative to my competitors. If I have 200,000 on my balance sheet, I would like it to stay in place so I have time to build. So some of that sort of discussion has to be discussed here so I know how to project what Bartlett Regional Hospital would like to see when that legislative group gets together. So I don't know about the 80-20. I have a lot firmer opinion on CON. There's the other one about nurse credentialing, reciprocity. I'm very supportive of that as everyone else. And there's one other issue out there that I wasn't quite sure of, but I got a beat on at least two. Good question. I'll get back to you. Yes.
Just a comment. I just appreciate the work on all senior leadership getting those contracts done, particularly anesthesia starting December. So
yeah. Well, we have Kim to thank for doing all of that hard work. And of course, you know, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that as we're applying the fair market value, it's not always easy to figure that out. It takes some time. And I think that was one of the major areas where we still had problems with sorting that out. So applying that law and having both parties, sides of the party understand that law and the risks is helpful. So that's one of the reasons why we put it on the board. Kim, I don't know if I...
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, you did. I just also wanted to thank Nate for all of his help with this. It was really a joint effort to kind of go through for both of us to get to this point. So we're super excited that the contract was signed and look forward to the relationships with them.
Right. But we hope to cut that time in half. 2 years away.
Ian, I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
I'd like you to touch a little bit more on the CON. What's the intent of the CON? I mean, why do you have, what does the CON mean and what's the value of the CON?
The certificate of need is a law that was enacted many years ago in almost every state. Many states, the majority of states have done away with that law. But the original intent was to ensure that there was no duplication of services and overbuilding in healthcare. I've come from states like Indiana that couldn't care less if you overbuild because it's your money if you want to take the risk. That's a much more what I would call laissez-faire way of looking at things. You do tend to get overbuilding, but those that can't survive sooner or later sell out. There's other states like the state of Washington that believe that it's very important not to overbuild. The problem in that state is that they're underbedded for the growth in that state. And when COVID came along, they were very underbedded. So there's pros and cons. The other thing is that the CON in terms of equipment was meant to ensure that there was enough volume so that the procedure could be done safely. Problem with that, initially it's okay, but most procedures become safer over time because the technology improves. And so then it becomes almost like a franchise. No one can get into that business because it becomes a franchise. But I think for this state, I think what I heard is that there's one Republican that really wants to do away with it. Some are divided about that. I would say that unless we have a significant amount of resources to compete right away, then we may not want to do that or support that. On the other hand, it's not, in this state, it's not applied evenly. So there's a major competitor that doesn't have to go through CON, and everyone else has to. So I think it could be cleaned up a little bit to make it fair, to make the ground rules even. But on the other hand, I would, at this point in time, I'd have a hard time recommending it for the benefit of Bartlett Regional Hospital. I could support doing away with certain pieces of equipment, going through the certificate of need, because those pieces of equipment just become those procedures just become much safer. So, for example, down in Washington, putting in catheters, not catheters, but what do you call it? When you put it
Stents.
Sorry. Stents. It's a franchise business down there because it's very safe cases. And so there are places that are very underserved because you can't get support for that. I don't have enough information about pockets of patients that aren't served well, but it's going to be a big issue. I think there's quite a bit of interest in getting rid of that.
So if I could follow up, so it's on the books now, right? In Alaska.
It's what?
It's on the books.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're a healthcare provider, that's my understanding of CON is if you're a healthcare provider providing services to Native beneficiaries, you're exempt from the CON requirements because IHS has a CON-like process that they go through in part in terms of approving that. If an entity is providing services to non-beneficiaries, it would seem like the CON rules that are on the books right now should apply, right?
Yes, and I talked with one administrator who believes that and believes the state is not forcing those. But again, I don't have an understanding of the law yet. That's one of the things I want to understand much better.
That's where I'm going with this. Is that if I could follow up, Kenny, it's going to, I feel that is a very important thing for Bartlett to have an answer to that requires a very specific skill set of legal understanding. And I question whether we have that. I think that from where I sit as a board member, we need to have real depth, expansive depth in a firm to be able to provide us that. And I would like to see Bartlett engage somebody, a firm who can competently, capably advise us on that matter.
And I would agree with, we need to understand that, but it crosses multiple jurisdictions. It crosses state, federal, Indian Health Services.
That's why you've got to have the breadth of, the ability of, large, very, firm that's got, national breadth to be able to address those issues, right? And we can't, time is of the essence here to a certain degree. The longer we wait, the more harm potentially Bartlett's going to endure. And I just would encourage our chair and you to move forward. Assuming the rest of the board, if there's concurrence on this thing, we need to move forward on that. We need to not talk about it. We need to get some really good advice about how we need to proceed on that.
Max, are you asking that we get an RFP and get another firm? Is that what you want us to try to work out?
Whether it requires an RFP or not, it seems like, we get kind of worked up around, do we have to have an RFP for this, that, or the other? The point is we need to have that advice. That's what we need to do. And whatever the end path has to be to get us to that point, we need to get there. So, but I guess what I am saying is that I would like to see Bartlett move forward with obtaining those services so that we can have the advice as a board on and good legal advice on how we proceed with this.
Maybe I can provide some input on Friday.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I saw a hand go up here.
I wanted to say something relevant to the conversation here. Yeah, I would think that first of all, is we need to find out where we would best get this advice, and then we can determine whether a contract could be sole source or whether it has to be an open RFP or what, because in some instances, if the options are very limited, you can justify doing a sole source, but that would be up to the city since we have to go through. Anyway, I think what we need to find out first is where could we get the kind of breadth of advice? It's probably going to be some outfit back in DC, frankly.
Thank you. And if I could just respond to that, if I could, Kenny, that I would recommend that, that's what we hire Ian to do, is to figure that stuff out.
Sure. Okay. You tell us.
I agree. So we're working on the plan. Show it.
To the chair. Also, it sounds like there might be other hospitals who would want to work with us on that.
Yes, I've had discussions with 2 hospitals. Now, if we got into, it, would they stand by us? Would they just watch us? Would they file any amicus curiae with, I don't know. But I do know that they are word themselves, and I think it's important to make sure that we include them to the extent that it makes sense.
Sometimes leadership doesn't have answers.
Yeah, I just wanted to voice my strong support. I think this is an important matter, and we've talked about it for a long time. Nothing's happened. So I think we really need to move this forward. I completely agree. The longer we don't do something, the more harm is going to come.
So I think from what I'm hearing everybody say, we kind of, Ian, we got our marching orders and we need to get to work on this as soon as possible.
Yes, sir.
And bring some stuff to the board. Any more questions or comments on this? Right. Does anybody have any questions on Ian's report, portion of his report, or anybody else's report? We're going to have Kim talk for a minute about her report.
Okay.
Ms. Bennett, but does anybody have any questions for Kim?
Sorry, through the chair, I just wanted to mention that we are beefing up our psychiatry services for psychiatrists. And so I'm excited to announce that Dr. Karam has signed on with us again. And he'll be starting in February. So those of you familiar, Dr. Karam was with us a couple summers ago. And now he's back with us. So we look forward to working with him again. And he'll be up on our mental health unit. So.
Another great job of getting another contract signed. That's great.
A lot of people were.
I know. Joe, do you have anything you want to add before we go to Kim? Report here?
No, I'm still just digging into. There's a lot of things that have changed since I've been gone, so I'm still trying to kind of run the processes. Dr. Ian, I've got a couple of marching orders myself. Looking at financial, trying to get good feedback here, financials in the town, make sure we have a good solid revenue cycle process.
Yeah, I know Ian had mentioned to me and probably Max too that he wanted to get the reports a little bit quicker instead of a couple months behind. So great, we'll get to work on that. Kim.
So, Anita, do you know if that policy made it into that packet that I was wanting to also make a motion to, see if I could get a motion for approval?
Let's see. I think it might be in my working file.
Okay. While you're looking for that, just quickly to go over home care services, good news. We had our survey and for our hospice. It was October, what was the dates on that? 23rd through the 27th. And she made a visit on every single hospice patient that we had. And we did have It was a state survey, a federal survey, and an emergency preparedness survey all rolled into one with our hospice. And we had 0 findings on our emergency preparedness. We had 3 findings on our state. We had 4 on our federal, and I didn't get that in there. All of them were very simple to correct. And they accepted our corrective action plan. And so we're actually just, the good news is we're just waiting now for CMS to give us approval and we could begin billing for hospice. So that was on November 22nd that I received the letter where our corrective action plan was approved on each of those. So that's the positive news. Just to let you know, I think that this, I came here on November 7th of last year to stand up the home health and hospice, and I had no idea how long it would take. I was being pushed to do it in 4 months, and I was like, there's no way, because we're at the state's mercy on when you get them here to survey you. And we did move really quick, and I think that this was a really great success on our hospice. We are waiting on our home care survey. We're just waiting. That's where we're sitting when surveyors show up, and we kind of know what she's going to be looking for. That's why I put those items through the quality committee to get those approved. And so we're anxiously awaiting that. We do have today, I think we have 12 patients on home health services. We've serviced 28. Our hospice currently has 4 patients on service with 4 pending referrals. And in total, we have served 12 at this point, 8 of which have expired. And we have had nothing but compliments regarding the care that we've been providing for both of those service lines. We're basically fully staffed for the volume that we're servicing. We do have job postings in our therapy department. And we have some offers out for some more RNs currently. So that's the good news. We've not had a difficult time at all recruiting nurses for hospice. A little bit of a challenge for home health. And I think that's odd because I love home health. That is my love in life, is home health. So I find that a little bit odd, but they're cross-trained to provide care on both of those service lines. So those are the positives. Moving to Wildflower Court, we are in our survey window, which we've been expecting one really since the acquisition occurred, but we are definitely in our survey window. They surveyed us last December, and we're expecting that survey at any time. I am working really hard to get all of our Wildflower Court policies fully reviewed, and what ones needs to come to the board for approval. And that is what I have here today, is a policy that basically gives me the authority to approve Wildflower Court policies after they've been reviewed by the directors and leaders of each of their areas, with the exception of policies that must be approved by the board. That is the QAPI plan, which we have moved through. But I do need this policy, a motion made to approve it. Dr. Malter supports it. I have visited with him, and Dr. Malter also has reviewed this policy, and he reviews all of our other policies with us. So as an update on Wildflower Court, today we have 54 residents. 54 residents is basically the max that we can take at this time in staff. As I said, we're a 61-bed facility, but we can staff safely up to 54, and we are at 54 today. Other than that, things are going really well at Wildflower Court. We're in the
I just want to stop you for a second so we can make this motion, get it passed, and then we'll go on from there.
Absolutely.
So we can make sure we're there. Lisa, can you do this motion for us?
Yeah, read it out.
That one's not
all right, I'd like to pass a motion to allow the administrator to define the consistent standards of practice for the policies, procedures, and guidelines that govern the practice at Wildflower Court. And anything you want me to add?
Perfect. I think I just want to add the word operations in there. Operational.
And operations.
And then, so that delineates from operations to what the board has to approve.
Okay. You have questions? Scroll it up. Yeah, scroll.
The other to the.
Here. It looks extensive, but
Yeah, right
it looks
there.
complete.
Just through the chair.
Yes.
My only concern was when it said policies addressing medication practices, through the med staff bylaws, doesn't that need to go to P&T committee? To the med staff? That would be my only correction on that.
Dr. Rosenfeld, Dr. Jones. Ian.
I don't know if we're credentialing people for Wildflower Court. I think we haven't got in.
You don't.
We're not credentialing.
You don't credential for a long-term care facility.
Anything under the hospital or under the active med staff that perform stuff, that's our jurisdiction, so we have it under Wildflower Court.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
So my first thought is, it seems like this is the first time that the majority of people have seen it. It also seems like it wasn't published in your packet. So I don't know that it's appropriate to make a motion at this time. I think you may need to do it at the next one. It will also give everyone an opportunity to look at it and public comment. So I hope that doesn't short circuit what you're trying to do, but I think you might be a step ahead.
Thank you, Emily. So should we throw this into the committee and then have it come out of committee and bring it to the board meeting next month?
Which committee should it go to?
Well, just as an aside, nursing homes are different than hospitals. They operate very differently in terms of their committees and things of that nature. So I would hope that we don't treat this as a department of the hospital. It's a separate entity that runs very much differently.
Separate license.
Correct.
Separate license and all those sorts of things. So it's not necessarily subject to the same things hospitals are subject to.
So question on that.
Yes.
And who gives the guidelines or the regulations for how medications are handled? You know, I mean, the control of medications and the monitoring of administration.
So we're required to have a pharmacist contracted that reviews all of our residents' medications, at least on a monthly basis. We're also contracted with a pharmacy that provides their medications. So we have, and of course, we have all policies in place on the administration, the management, the security of those medications.
You also have a medical director, Alex.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so, and then the
Provides
medication.
oversight. He's also going to be the incoming chief of the medical staff.
Correct.
And then through the chair. So then the medications, for example, are kept behind, what is it, 2 or 3 locked, not facilities, but you've got a cart, you've got it in a locked cabinet, and it's in a locked room or something like that.
Absolutely. We follow all the regulatory requirements for the security of those meds, and controlled meds are under double lock. Yes. The pharmacist even at the hospital, he has rounded over there to assess and to take a look at our pharmacy and how we are managing resident medications.
Does, again, through the chair, does then the pharmacist you contract with to provide medications, does he or she put them in the bubble packs and everything so
The pharmacy, yes, everything is bubble packed, yes.
And I'm just pursuing this, but I know in my years at JAMI, the staff would observe the clients then taking their medications from the bubble packs, but they didn't administer them because they weren't always medical staff, but the cart was brought out by medical staff. So do your staff administer? Because you have people that can't.
Yes, we administer. Absolutely, unless a resident that has the mental capacity to determine that they will administer their own and they sign that, absolutely.
Okay.
But otherwise, nursing administers all medications. We do not use medication aids or anything like that.
Thank you.
It's helpful, we've been involved in the QA over at Wildflower, we could look at this in quality committee.
You're just not having a quality committee meeting in December.
Not have one in December.
You do not have.
We could have one if need be.
What's that?
We could have one if need be, if that's appropriate.
I think quality is the best committee. I agree with you.
But I'm happy.
It did go through our quality committee at Wildflower Court. I will tell you that. It did.
If we could be helpful, we'll be there right now.
I was thinking that I would just put it in a committee so it can get through the committee and talk. And then come out of that committee and just come to the board next month. So I don't know if we need to have one just for that. So we could put it, looks like next month's meetings, I'll just pull up our calendar here, is going to be finances on the 15th and compliance is on the 21st. So I'm not sure when we get to the calendar, we're going to talk about what day we're going to move our board meeting to. So I might just throw this in finance. And we have a lot of people come to finance and talk about that. Actually, Emily said that would be okay too. CBJ law, thank you. So
Is it, through the chair, is it safe to say is that the nursing home has a whole separate set of committees, right? That do the same thing that these other committees at the hospital do?
And I'm
But we have
funneling
a
that.
single board.
Correct. Correct. So our quality committee and infection control committee meet dually at Wildflower Court. And then we're pushing items on up to the board committee so that they come on up to the board.
So, my thought is that the same amount of scrutiny of their committees is the same process we go through the hospital's committee. So I wouldn't say this is premature. It's just that we're getting used to how does the nursing home put through resolutions that our committee structure has not dealt with, but another committee structure has. And I think this is important for the approval of our licensure, right?
Yes, it is.
So if they come before we deal with this issue, then what happens with our licensure? Is it just delayed?
It would probably be delayed until we get this corrected, yes. Which will,
I just want to be careful that we're not duplicating the work that's already being done at Wildflower Court, thinking that we have to, but maybe we don't.
Right. What may be useful to the board is to have a better opportunity to understand that at a future meeting so that you feel comfortable with passing resolutions to this. And maybe we bring one of those committee members with us when we have a resolution, but I would still feel comfortable passing this because it's not a hospital policy, it's a nursing home policy. It's just my 2 cents.
they're the same policies that have been in place with the exception of this one because we were not hospital owned before. So the nursing home administrator did have the authority to be the final approver on all these policies. So now that I have a different board to come to, I'm asking for that approval.
I just want to be clear too, and it's you all to decide how these integrate and where the committees go. My only concern is that it wasn't publicly noticed and it wasn't in your packet and you as a board didn't have the opportunity for that final piece. So if you decide you don't want to send it to one of the committees that will agree to this structure, you still just need to put it as an action item for this board at your next meeting. Does that make sense?
So you're saying we can't approve it because there was no prior notice?
That's right. You cannot approve it tonight. It was not in the packet. It wasn't an action item. And so that you had 2 others that were not listed specifically as action items, but they were in the packet because they went through your committees. So there was public notice. This one had no public notice. That's the difference.
So we could do one of two things, and basically, we can notice this to our next board meeting as an action item, and Kim can bring it up to us through her quality committee. Or we could put this in, like I said, our next committee, finance, or whichever committee's next.
Would it be, I'm sorry, I did not mean to interrupt you.
What's that?
I did not mean to interrupt you. I apologize. Would there be the option of maybe a board member being on our quality committee over at Wildflower Court? Is that too much too? Would that be too difficult? It's just a thought.
We could definitely do
Okay.
a liaison thing, but not actually on the committee. We could do that. I know that during the acquisition of Wildflower Court, I know that Max talked a lot about that kind of crossing. Is that correct, Max?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's necessary though. I honestly don't. I think simple is better here.
Yeah.
So Kim, I don't understand you, if I could, Kenny, I don't understand the potential harm that's being created by not approving this tonight. And that should guide whether we hold a special meeting or figure out some way to get this approved more quickly. I mean, how quickly do you need to have this in place?
Before they come in the door,
Which is when?
anytime.
Drop in. They're in the window now.
Yeah, they don't call you ahead of time.
Mr. Salamanca, so I asked Ms. Dodd the same question, whether she could wait till the next meeting, and it sounds like no. So you could have a special board meeting over Zoom. You just need to publicly notice 24 hours.
We've got a planning committee meeting on Friday, right?
Yep, we could.
Let's just do it as part of that.
Yes, that would work.
I mean, that's Friday.
We're going to talk about a calendar coming up because we're talking about whether we're going to have a planning committee meeting or not. So maybe we'll just have Okay, that sounds good. Right, Kim, I'm sorry.
I'm now at a loss. I don't really know of anything else other than we're still working on trying to maintain staffing at Wildflower Court and to recruit. I do have 2 local RNs, hopefully in the next new employee orientation. So that's a positive. Other than that, any questions for me? I took up quite a bit of time.
Does it have any questions for Kim? Thank you very much. And Kim will work on getting this done ASAP.
Thank you.
Right, hopefully. With that, we're going to go to our legal counsel report and start with Barbara.
Hello again. Quick update on projects that we've been working on since the last meeting. Some of these are noted in the CEO report as well. So there's a completed professional services agreement for anesthesia services, as well as a separate agreement for radiology. The hospital's also executed a recruitment agreement for a radiologist who'll be relocating to Juneau, and an employment agreement. We worked on an employment agreement for a new general surgeon that would be starting next year. I believe I mentioned at the last meeting there was pending review of a pharmacy services agreement for Wildflower Court, and we've also been providing some input as needed on a few matters related to the Wildflower Court acquisition. Currently assisting with drafting a new professional services agreement for women's cancer care services, and continuing to participate in the committee meetings for the review and revision of the med staff bylaws and related documents. And that's all I have. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. Hearing none.
Mr. Chair, I think all of my items are potentially executive session items. I don't have anything else.
All right, with that, we'll go to Mr. Bryson, our CBJ lead.
Thank you, Kenny. Our assembly retreat is coming up this weekend, and had lots of people reaching out to every assembly member that wants to give us 2 cents going into the retreat. We're having a finance committee meeting tomorrow night to get a high-level overview of where the budget's at and how it's going to impact next year. The following week, the assembly goes to AML, the Alaska Municipal League, and so most of them will be out of town next week. I did speak with both Director Koch, Public Works, and Manager Kester about getting the emergency department on the legislative priority list. It didn't seem like that was going to be an issue, so I was glad to see that it was moving forward here. I was saying leave the 4 million on there. You guys, 2 million is enough. That'll be good. I had a really good meeting with CEO Warden and with Mr. Solomon Gross, where they gave me a nice high-level overview of what's going on here at the hospital. I then toured half of the hospital with the facilities director, and we were just so thorough in like all the little nooks and crannies we went to that we had to stop at the halfway point because he was done with his workday. So I'm going to come back. Well, I literally wanted to go into like every room in the hospital. I had a lot of fun touring the hospital. And I actually spoke with several staff members, and I'm going to come back next time where I can like gear up and go into some places that they wouldn't let me go into last time. So I had a lot of fun on the field trip. We do have HRC hospital board interviews are coming up as we passed the deadline for people to put their applications in for this new round of applications. And I am pleased to invite all of you to my birthday party. I'm hosting my 50th birthday party at Centennial Hall on January 6th, and I'm literally inviting everyone I work with, and that includes all of you fine folks. So Saturday night, January 6th, I'll leave one of the flyers here that'll be floating around. I'm sure we can find somewhere to stick it. And yeah, it's a fundraiser to benefit a whole bunch of great charities here in the community. And that is my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Bryson?
What was your funnest department so far?
I'm sorry?
What department did you like the best?
I got a lot of information, and I was able to spend a little bit of time in the lab. So it was really nice to see the lab from the back room. I've seen it a handful of times from the front of the house. I did not get to go into I didn't get to see the Da Vinci. I didn't get to look at like a surgery room or anything like that. So I missed a couple of places. Let me reserve my opinion for when I get done with everything, because I wanted to go to, I heard about there was like a tunnel to Wild.
You must come to
Right? How could I not go in the tunnel?
It will
So.
be your favorite.
We can get you in to play with the Da Vinci.
Yeah, excellent. I'll reach out to Ms. Moffett to arrange for another visit in some time.
Thank you, Wade. We're glad to have you here. I know I didn't get to see you last meeting. I wasn't here, but we're really glad to have you here. So.
Glad to be here, sir.
With that, we'll just go to my report, and I'm glad to be back. Went to most of the committee meetings. I did miss Lindy's quality committee meetings, my first day back in town, but I got to talk to most of the board members personally this month, so that was great. I spent a lot of time with Ian, talking about Bartlett, and we've met with legal, and like Mr. Bryson said, we've met with Mr. Bryson, and we've had some good conversations, and it's really great for us to have someone that has such knowledge of the healthcare industry, but also kind of just understand the way that we operate as a hospital. So with Ian coming here, he's really actually shown me, how you look at things a different way. So we're really glad to have you here, and it's really been a pleasure working with you this last month. Like I said, I got to meet with everybody, and I heard what everybody's thoughts and stuff had to say. I know that in the next few months we'll begin our challenge of of a permanent CEO search. And one of the things that's really great is Ian's here to help us with that too as well. So, that's one of the things that we're really great about that. And then us as a board will have to decide what course we're going to take. And Chad's actually reached out to me from the HR department to start the process. So in the next month or two, we will be putting together a working team to begin the process of our CEO search. With that, let's just pop on the board calendar. We'll just go right in the board calendar. So we have a planning meeting on Friday. Deb, you want to talk about that? Do you want to do it? I mean, I know we talked a little bit about this earlier. So
we did, and Nate and I had an opportunity to talk about it. There are some items that we could certainly bring up if we want to have I would say a shortened planning committee and roll into our single item board meeting to pass the resolution for Wildflower Court. So I'm fine with that. There are, Nate mentioned that there are a couple of items that would be of interest, but may not be enough to fill a full hour.
That's perfect. So
we
we're
could do
doing a
that.
one-item board meeting. So how many board members will be able to attend on Friday, either via Zoom or in person?
It's on my calendar. It's been on the calendar.
So everybody will be able to be here. That's great. Dr. Jones?
I don't know.
That's amazing.
We have Meditech on Thursday, so.
So we'll go ahead and schedule that, and then we go work with Kim to get a packet out on that too. So credentialing is on the 12th. I'm gonna be out of town from the 6th to the 16th. So I asked Deb to go that for me. And finance is on the 15th. Is that good with you guys? Okay. And then so our board meeting, I'm not purposely skipping compliance, but our board meeting is scheduled for the 26th, the day after Christmas. So Anita has come up with some other options that her and I have looked at to change the board meeting to either be on Monday the 18th, Wednesday the 20th, or Thursday the 21st. I personally recommend Wednesday the 20th of December to put our board meeting on that day. Does anybody have any conflicts or?
This would be at the usual time.
This would be our 5 o'clock, 5:30.
I'm gone that whole week, so.
You're gone that week? Will you be able to join online?
I'll be in the South Pacific.
When do you leave?
15th, right after our finance committee meeting, shortly after. I'll be back on the 4th of January.
Oh, so you wouldn't be in December. Okay. Oh. Okay, well, so the 20th is still my recommendation.
I can live with the 20th.
What's that?
I can live with the 20th. I'll be gone after December 26th, so I'm glad you didn't go later that week. Because I had planned it that way.
Okay, so we'll make that on the 20th of December, the board meeting. And then we'll just roll right into compliance still, if that's okay with you, Al, on the 21st? Yes. And then we'll just keep Christmas at normal time. And I think that's it for the calendar. Does anybody have anything else they want to schedule? December should be a fairly smooth and easy month. All right. So any board comments or questions?
Yes, I have 19th.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, so the 19th, I know it's not on the calendar, it's the Bartlett Hospital Foundation Christmas tree lighting in the lobby. It's really a lot of fun. And I understand Santa Claus is in the room here. There he is.
Ho, ho, ho.
So, I've done it the last few years. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of kids. I think this year is even going to be bigger and better with a bigger turnout. So if everybody can come in, I think it's at 4:30. Is that correct?
I think so.
4:30.
I have it on at 4:00, but it might be 4:30.
I thought it was
4 o'clock.
I said not everyone.
So I need to send another reminder. Okay.
Oh, Aaron says 5.
5. Okay. Got it all wrong. 5 o'clock. Come early.
Oh, it's at 5 o'clock?
5 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
Carolyn can't come at 5.
So we'll go on to board's comments and questions.
Yeah, I would like to take this opportunity to make a comment. I like to do it before Mr. Bryson gets out of here. Just one part of it. As elect Dr. Rosenthal, I won't be here after next month, presumably if you get somebody appointed in my position since I'm going off. But what I'd like to say is, having been on the board for a number of years now, that in terms of appointment of board members, it's really important that we get, people to apply and that the assembly look at a variety of people, because we are a community hospital with a community board, and we need to be well represented with members of the community, a diverse members of the community. And certainly from an ethnic standpoint, we don't have a lot of diversity right now. And we seem to have a pretty good distribution in terms of gender and so forth. But we need to have good people, and we need to get them appointed. And I'm hoping there should always be every year at least one new member, I think, on the board, having been through several of these cycles. Some years you might get a couple, and you don't want, that's okay if you've got 9 members, because it doesn't make for too much change. But we do need that. We need to have people appointed. And if you're able to get the appointments done this next month, that means if they're done before the next board meeting, which is now a little early on the 20th, then this board is going to be electing officers. That's in our, it's not the bylaws, it's actually in our policies, that we have to elect officers at the next regular board meeting after appointments have been made. So what I would like to encourage, because there's been a lot of sort of staticness in our board. First of all, during the pandemic, there was at least one year where the assembly decided, and I was one of the people that ended up staying on. I was going to get off after 6 years. That seemed like enough, but was asked to stay around because there wasn't an interest in having a lot of turnover of leadership, and you're trying to maintain continuity and didn't want to be training up new people at a time when we could have had, a major outbreak of COVID here that we were dealing with, and setting up a field hospital, and you didn't need people learning how to handle their role. So we had same board members, and it's kind of gone on and on. So getting some diversity on the board would be really good. And then the same thing happened with our officers. And I think part of that is because a few years ago, at least 3 years ago, there was a challenge by one of the people that was a board member at the time about whether or not we could have a nominating committee. The board used to always have a nominating committee. That was in our policies. And it's an ad hoc committee that was appointed by the president. And of course, under Robert's rules, the president or chair would appoint, and then that's a committee that they cannot serve on. But it would come up, what they would do is they would actually interview every member of the board and see, one, if that person was interested in running for any office, willing to do so, and would they, who would they like to see in offices if they weren't going to run themselves? And then they'd come up with a slate. Now that slate wasn't automatically passed, it was presented. So we've interviewed, these are the people that are willing to run and that we are setting forth as our recommendation that these people be considered. And then of course it's open to nominations from the floor. And that worked very well. But once that nominating committee was basically struck down, and I think it might have pertained to this 3-member rule, which the committee was 3 members, it could have been made a 2-member committee and gotten away from that difficulty. But once that happened, then what's happened over at least 2 years, but maybe this will be the 3rd, is that nothing happens, no discussion unless it's incidental between members before the board meeting where officers are elected, and then it's thrown open. Okay, who would like to run for office? Open for nominations now for president or vice or secretary. And it doesn't give people a chance to think much about it, even though they know it's coming up. And it's, if people find it awkward to say, well, I'd like to run for vice chair this time, and so I'm nominating myself, unless they got it together and got somebody to nominate them and so forth. So what I'm saying is I'd like to request through the chair, if the board is in agreement, that our legal people take another look at how we could have, as a board, a nominating committee that would get usually appointed like around the 1st of November and begin working with people to come up with a slate. It wouldn't happen this year, it's probably too late, but get something reconsidered there. And with regards to officers, the other thing I'd like to point out is that in days of yore, when Bob Valiant was CEO, and he's thought of by many as if not the nicest person, always, he was one of the most effective, if not the most effective CEO that Bartlett's had. And he was CEO for many years, working for Quorum, et cetera, until unfortunately he got ill. I mean, the building we're in was named after him. But during his time, and he wouldn't have controlled this, but the board president changed every year. There was an understanding that that everyone had an obligation to be a board president at some point. I mean, the assembly appoints all of us who are on the board, and I'm sure they would think that any of us should be capable of holding any office, including committee chair. And we would, they would turn them over, you know, each year.
And it's all the positions, all the officers. It wasn't just the chair position.
Okay.
All of those would rotate.
Okay, I knew that the chair.
Anita's nodding her head down there. I think she remembers that too.
Yeah, so yeah, it just kept things stirred up. Now that sometimes people would come back after a year or two and go back into a slot. That happened with a couple of them, including Urata, Dr. Urata, and he even came back later after, while I was here, he came back didn't assume presidency. But the point is, there have been other ways of ensuring everybody participates. So my request or charge, if I may, to each of you that are on the board is be thinking about this. Think about when you got appointed to the board, you have not only the opportunity and right to become an officer or a committee chair or whatever, but you have an obligation to do that too. That's part of what you should do. And it's a shared burden. And I will say, as I'm sure Kenny is well aware, when you are president, it's like at least a half-time unpaid job, unpaid, but very satisfied, sometimes more. So there's work with it, but think about it and be prepared to step forward and offer yourself up, and think about that over the next month, because you may be electing another slate of officers this coming year, and whoever is president will then be appointing the committees think about which committees you want to serve on and whether you'd like to chair one of them. So I just think that's all very important. And as I'm leaving, I'd like to see some vitality and change, and different people have different leadership skills and different methods of leading, and it's good to mix things up.
Thanks.
If I could just chime on to that, I think I'm glad you brought that up, Brenda, there's a depth of bench kind of
Yeah, there's that.
part of this too that is important to, I think, a board to have, people that have filled the roles as you go around, so that everybody has a kind of a broader understanding of how all this stuff works and has that. And, I think that's important. Just for various reasons, I'm not going to repeat as secretary, so my seat will be up next year. I think that it wouldn't be a bad thing to have, to be honest with you, to have the new people sitting in the chair and whether Deb moves up. And it has nothing to do against anybody or anything. It's a matter of having the full board have that experience.
Thank you.
So you got me curious now. So has legal told us we cannot have a nominating committee for some reason?
I don't know.
I know that the year that they stopped during the slate, that we had a board member that was very persistent that this is not the way that we should be doing this. And legal agreed with him and stopped the nominating committee, and they just took it right from the floor.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I could continue, I'm very much in favor of the nominating committee. I think this is something we should think through, and there shouldn't be a spur of the moment. I know exactly what you mean. They say all in favor, aye. And what are you going to do? Try to embarrass somebody? It should be thought through. And what we need is a method that's appropriate and allowable under the Open Meetings Act to do that.
I think excuse me, if I may, I think it had to do with that 3-member ruling and why the discussion didn't turn to, well, let's just make it a 2-person committee and not have that be a problem, because I think then as members of the board, they would individually contact people for input. They're seeking input is all. But would that be a problem if they then talk to a 3rd person?
So through the chair, so I'll have to look at it. So my initial thought is anytime a formal committee is created, we're looking at, so we had the same conversation with that executive committee, right? Anytime the majority of a membership is meeting, it's Open Meetings Act. So even if you only had 2, if one person is meeting themselves, I mean, it doesn't work. But it doesn't really, so the language is when a majority of a committee is meeting. So,
okay.
But I think there may be a way to do it. So,
if I may, yes, my question would be then what the committee did. They were appointed, and the chair would appoint one as the chair, and so but then they were tasked with divvying up the current board members, and each of them would contact certain ones to get input. They have a little questionnaire of what they're asking about. You're willing to do it and which seat and blah, blah. And then at some point they'd have to get together. Now they can't get together with the chair because the chair isn't on that committee, but they'd have to talk to each other. And so then they're meeting.
okay.
And so they could have a meeting, but go into executive session, couldn't they? Because they aren't going to act on anything until they come out.
That's right. They could go into executive session if they're going to talk about reputation and character. So you can always publicly notice a meeting, start it, and then immediately go into executive session. The HRC, I believe you guys utilize that sometimes. That's how they view it. I mean, so that is a way to then talk about personal issues.
And so then if it could be a committee chair and 2 members, just like all the standing committees, that would make sense too. But yeah, okay. Anyway, that's how it would function. I think it didn't have a chance to be thought out and it got canceled And it was because the person that raised the issue had wanted to be nominated for something and didn't get. Okay.
Any other comments?
Thank you, Brenda.
All right. Okay, with that, we will take a quick break. Just a couple minute break, 5-minute break out there, and then we'll come back and go into executive session. Hal, you want to take us to the executive session?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that we recess into executive session to discuss several matters, including those of which by law, municipal charter, or ordinance are required to be confidential or involve consideration of records that are not subject to public disclosure, specifically the credentialing report, the medical staff meeting minutes, the patient safety dashboard, and to discuss possible Garden Regional Hospital litigation, specifically a candid discussion of facts, litigation strategies with the Department of Regional Hospital and the municipal attorney, and to discuss matters which may tend to prejudice the reputation of any person involved. Mr. Chairman, I also ask that you be given the discretion to choose which staff members to allow to remain.
Thank you very much. Hal. You get a second? Dr. Rath, thank you. Second. Okay, so for this first part of the meeting, for the first part of all right, Hal, you want to make the motions?
Yes, I move that we accept the credentialing report. I don't think there was anything else we, was there something else?
Yeah.
Well, I move
I'll
that we
second.
accept the credentialing.
Okay, first, second, any objections? See no objections, the credentialing report is accepted. Yeah.
I move that we empower, I don't know if that's the right word. What did I say? What did we say?
Direct.
Direct, thank you. I move that we direct our city attorney, the chair of our governance committee, and our CEO to craft a series of recommendations regarding board governance and improvement to bring it back to the December meeting for review and approval if we're ready for it.
Second.
All right. Any objections? Seeing no objections. Thank you very much. It's a long meeting.
One quick point of order. Anita, I'm reading your email about the planning committee. Do we need to add on there that we're also doing a short full board meeting?
I sent a separate invite.
So Emily, can we chat now?
Yeah.
Anytime.
Okay, great.
Thank
Thank you for your help on this. I know